Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Rosalind Croucher and I am President and Acting Disability Discrimination Commissioner at the Australian Human Rights Commission. I'm delighted to be here today to welcome you, to speak about the importance of employment and celebrate the success of the IncludeAbility project. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we are meeting today. I'm in Melbourne on the traditional lands of the Kulin Nation, and I know that many of you are zooming in from all over the place, all over the country on traditional lands of people of our First Nations, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and any First Nations people, and particularly First Nations people with disability who might be attending our webinar today. Employment for people with disability is deeply rooted in the principles of human rights, including the right to work, to equality, non-discrimination, and the pursuit of a more just and inclusive society. Article 27 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities recognises the right of persons with disabilities to work on an equal basis with others. This includes the right to the opportunity to gain a living by work freely chosen or accepted in a labour market and work environment that is open, inclusive and accessible to persons with disabilities. It is fitting to have this event so close to the International Day of People with Disability, which is coming up on the 3rd of December. And the United Nations theme for this year is United in Action to Rescue and Achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, for, with and by persons with disabilities. The employment of people with disability is related to every one of the Sustainable Development Goals. However, in particular, SDG 8, decent work and economic growth, promotes sustained, inclusive and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. The learnings and model developed from the successful IncludeAbility project can realise this goal and our obligations under the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. IncludeAbility, a wonderful name, sought to address this critical human right in Australian society by creating equal opportunities for employment for people with disability. Only 53.4% of people aged 15 to 64 years with disability are employed, compared with 84% of people the same age without disability. This issue, of course, has been well known by the disability community and highlighted in recent inquiries, many inquiries, including the Royal Commission into Violence, Abuse, Neglect and Exploitation of People with Disability, or as we call it, the Disability Royal Commission. The reasons why we should employ people with disability will not be new to you. Meaningful and sustainable employment of people with disability benefits the individual and it benefits business, society and our economy. It creates financial independence, social inclusion, self-determination and empowerment. The employment of people with disability creates a more inclusive society where the diversity of employees reflects that of their communities, and people with disability can participate on an equal basis with others. What IncludeAbility shows is the how, and that is what we will be discussing today. It takes the commitment to the idea and the aspiration into how it can be done. It is with this that I'm delighted to announce that IncludeAbility has received $1.9 million in funding from the Paul Ramsay Foundation to continue the program until 2026. In the second phase of the project, IncludeAbility will expand its employment pilots and share our successful model with employers and disability employment project providers. It will build on the recommendations from the Disability Royal Commission final report from the end of September in seeking to create opportunities for sustainable open employment, inclusion, and desegregation. Today, we are joined up by a lineup of impressive speakers. I will say stellar lineup of impressive speakers, including the fabulous IncludeAbility Ambassador and Professor in Management at UTS Business School, Simon Darcy, Employment Network member and Disability Inclusion Lead from Woolworths, equally fabulous, Geoff Trappett, OAM, the Chief Executive Officer of Good Sammy Enterprises, Kane Blackman. I'll also give you the adjective of fabulous, Kane. And while I'm on a roll, the fabulous Erin Wilson, Professor and Uniting Chair in Community Services Innovation at Centre for Social Impact, Swinburne. Professor Erin Wilson again. And while I'm on screen, I will say thank you to our Auslan interpreters who will assist us ably, as they always do, in our webinars. I will now hand over the reins to IncludeAbility Ambassador Simon Darcy to provide an overview of the IncludeAbility project. Enjoy the webinar and keep up the fantastic work. This is a great, great project. Thank you, and over to you, Simon.
Hi, thank you. And yes, my name's Simon Darcy. I'm a professor at the UTS Business School and co-lead of the UTS Disability Research Network. I'm a person with lived experience of some 40 years with a spinal cord injury, and I'm a power wheelchair user. I would like to thank Rosalind for her fabulous welcome and introduction. I've played a dual role as one of the IncludeAbility ambassadors and the external member of the steering committee. Today, I will give an overview of IncludeAbility project, which is shown on the PowerPoint that's just been put up. IncludeAbility is a national project led by the Australian Human Rights Commission, which aims to increase access to meaningful employment opportunities for people with disability. As Ros mentioned, I would also like to acknowledge the past Disability Discrimination Commissioner, Dr. Ben Gauntlet, as he had identified employment as the area which he wished to contribute to in a major way of his focus during his term. The project achieves this by building greater capacity amongst public and private sector organisations to address employment barriers for Australians living with disability. The original design of IncludeAbility was developed with pro bono assistance from the Boston Consulting Group. The model builds on success factors from other diversity employment programs such as the Champions of Change Coalition, Reconciliation Australia, and Chief Executive Women. As Ros identified, the project was funded by the Paul Ramsay Foundation and the Department of Social Services, ILC, and is being extended for another 3 years thanks to the general support of the Paul Ramsay Foundation, who obviously have found great value in what the steering committee over the last few months have been calling IncludeAbility 1.0, for them to be moving to fund the next stage of what the steering committee has called IncludeAbility 2.0. So we now have the 4 components of the IncludeAbility project up on screen. The first of these, of which I am part of, is the Ambassador Advisory Group, comprised of 17 Australians living with lived experience of disability, with different employment experiences ranging from the positive to the more challenging. The role of ambassadors is to co-create includeability activities and direction consistent with the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, obligations to embed lived experience into policy and programs. Ambassadors are involved in all includeability activities, including attendance at the employee network meetings, design and delivery of pilots, review of resources, and in my case, steering committee meetings. Ambassadors are remunerated for their time and expertise, which is a component of valuing not only their lived experience, but their expertise in employment and the sectors in which they are engaged. Second, the employer network is comprised of executive leaders from 17 of Australia's largest organisations and businesses. Large organisations were strategically selected because of their ability to make changes at scale to what is a depressing situation with the employment levels, as Ros outlined. And we want to impact a significant number of Australians with disability into the world of employment for the first time. While the initial commitment was at CEO level, the diversity and inclusion leads from each organisations are the primary contact with IncludeAbility. They attend quarterly employer network meetings with ambassadors and subject matter experts to exchange ideas on specific topic areas, such as reasonable adjustments, targeted recruitment, and job customisation. Employers also complete an annual access and inclusion health check and participate in employment pilot programs. Third is hosting a range of publicly available employment and workplace resources to support the employers and employees with disability. I want to give this a big plug as a great go-to place, particularly if you aren't confident with understanding all aspects of employment. There's a wonderful eLearn module that's freely available on the importance of and ways to improve employment for people with disability. Other guides include targeted recruitment guidelines, access and inclusion health check, hosting accessible and inclusive in-person and online meetings, preparing for an interview, establishing a disability employee network, your rights under the Disability Discrimination Act. Fourth, and if this was MasterChef, we could refer to the pilot programs as the hero of the dish. The pilots are where the networking and learning of includeability hit the road, so to speak. They have delivered exceptional success outcomes and created a new blueprint for how businesses could increase employment opportunities for people with disability. Kane and Geoff are here to speak about their experiences of the Perth pilots in the coming session. The pilot employment program brings together employing organisations, specialised employment providers, and people with disability through a focus on building place-based partnerships to achieve long-term job opportunities. The pilot model involved the employing organisation offering a guaranteed number of new roles to people with disability, very important new roles. An intermediary, specialised disability employment support provider, for example, providing the talent pool, screening and matching candidates, and providing support to both employees and employing organisations. The Australian Human Rights Commission provide the initial link between the employing organisation and intermediary, as well as offering disability confidence training to the employing organisation, project management support, and advice regarding tailoring jobs and supports. IncludeAbility Illawarra was a place-based program in New South Wales Illawarra region in collaboration with the Disability Trust. The focus was on employees with acquired disability who were seeking to return to work. Employers were asked to commit to offering employment to at least one participant for a minimum of 13 weeks at a minimum of 15 hours a week at full wages. 6 employers took part: Disability Trust, Disability Employer Network members Kmart and Australia Post, University of Wollongong Global and College, and Illawarra iTech. 13, some 86% of participants, have continued their employment at the end of the pilot period. In Western Australia, IncludeAbility collaborated with Good Sammy Enterprises and Woolworths. 15 young people over 18 with intellectual or cognitive disability who work at the Australian Disability Enterprise of Good Sammy were offered roles in Woolworths stores in the Perth area. The pilot period was for 12 weeks with 8 hours of employment per week at full wages. The pilot applies a job customization approach of matching individual interests and skills with roles that need to be performed in Woolworths stores. At the end of the pilot, 12 of the participants, some 80%, accepted ongoing roles with Woolworths. I will now hand over to Professor Erin Wilson, who will speak about the IncludeAbility evaluation findings and the key project learnings. Over to you, Erin.
Thanks very much, Simon. That's great. Appreciate that. As Simon said, I'm Erin Wilson from the Centre of Social Impact at Swinburne University of Technology. The Centre of Social Impact worked alongside the IncludeAbility team for several years on this project, and we had 2 roles. We acted as a critical friend to bring the evidence into the implementation design across all stages of the project. And we also had the role of evaluator, trying to understand what made things work here and what things, remained in the way of employment. Before I proceed, I just want to remind you that there is a Q&A section on your screen, and you can place questions about the program or anything that we're talking about today in that, and that'll be addressed in our Q&A session at the end. So head over to the Q&A tab. So I want to talk a little bit about the barriers today and the ingredients that made it work. So there's substantial evidence about the barriers to employment for people with disability, and to some extent this project confirmed that evidence, but it also dug deeper into it, highlighting our need to deeply understand each specific employer context when designing and providing appropriate support and capacity building. So the 5 key barriers that we surfaced, to some extent, as I said, are not new. They are in relation to attitudes about disability that sit inside employing organisations, and also the broader expectations of society about people's capacity. Recruitment and onboarding practices and processes was identified as a barrier, as was embedded organisational structures, processes and reporting. Also the culture of not disclosing or even asking about disability, and difficulties in finding the right person for the job. So I'll talk about some of those today, but ultimately and overwhelmingly, IncludeAbility participants identified that attitudinal and organisational barriers were some of the key barriers that result in people with disabilities being excluded from workplaces. Organisational barriers have been built up over time inside employing organisations, and have become part of business as usual. They've not really been critiqued or identified over time. They're just an accepted part of the way things are done in each organisation. For example, the Disability Royal Commission has also identified some of these, and they've identified the increasing systematisation of recruitment processes. This was also a feature that employer network members discussed here. Linked to this are remnants of unnecessarily narrow selection criteria for jobs, often where position descriptions have been sitting around for a long time, they haven't really been critiqued, and inherent requirements really need a makeover, but that hasn't occurred. Organisations also use standardised and sometimes group interview processes that don't work well for some people. And there are often complex and rigid onboarding processes that can be time consuming and require some skill sets and access to digital processes that may not be appropriate for all people. While employing organisations in this project clearly had a strategy of supporting employment of people with disability, otherwise they wouldn't have signed up for the project. Interestingly, this did not frequently translate within their organisations to specific targeted recruitment actions, even to welcome messages on job ads for people with disability, or to explicit invitations to adjust recruitment processes to suit individual needs. This project does highlight that barriers go well beyond recruitment policies and practices. And it's interesting that the research evidence and to some extent employment interventions have focused a lot on recruitment as a key barrier. But this project highlights that the barriers sit well beyond that as well in other parts of the organisational operating environment. And this can include things like company productivity metrics, that assume that everyone in the organisation can work at a set pace and the same pace, and organisational processes that reward and penalise parts of the organisation if they don't match up to these kind of standardised expectations. This sort of approach actively disincentivises managers from building a diverse workforce. Organisational processes also mean that managers have little flexibility to customise their roles. And employers also reported that they sometimes found it difficult to find appropriate talent pipelines of people with disability, even when they wished to employ people with disability. In some cases, they wanted people with specific skill sets, and they were unable to find a match of those two things, people with disability who had those skill sets. We also could see that employing organisations required substantial support from employment support providers beyond recruitment, and that included support to customise the roles once identified and to troubleshoot and problem solve in an ongoing way. Next slide, please. There are some key ingredients why this quite multi-levelled process of the project worked. And we've identified 5 of those here as the secret sauce that made IncludeAbility successful. And some of these clearly echo other those identified in other interventions, but there are some new ones as well, which I'll get to. But broadly, we think that the 5 are that the change initiative was led by the Australian Human Rights Commission as an expert, particularly in the area of disability discrimination legislation as it applies to employment. The second ingredient is safe spaces and a culture of learning. Third, access to high quality information. Also enabling piloting and prototyping inside employing organisations. And finally, what our informants in the research have called shoulder-to-shoulder support for employers. And whilst, as I said, it's a multi-component project that Simon has outlined, we want to briefly focus on one set of ingredients here and then go to the whole set as they're played out in the pilots in a minute. But a key theme of the data and around barriers and enablers is the focus on the need to support employers to build their capacity to problem solve and implement very localised solutions with the confidence that these are consistent with legislative requirements, particularly those in relation to the Disability Discrimination Act. Employers generally don't want to do the wrong thing and often need some reassurance that the solutions that they're customising actually are consistent with the guidelines in relation to disability discrimination. And it was the involvement of the Commission here that many commented was really key to them to have an expert ally to both train their workforce, but also walk alongside employers. Participating employers talked a lot about the safe space created together with the Commission to build knowledge, to try out strategies and to learn by doing. In some cases, they also talked about learning from other employment network members about that. And in one one pilot, there was a community of practice of employers brought together and led by one of the IncludeAbility ambassadors, along with other Commission staff and the intermediary involved. The key elements of the pilot design highlight the other ingredients as well. And I want to turn to that now, if we can move to the next slide. Thank you. So the pilots are an example of the way these key ingredients all came together. As Simon has explained, the pilots involved 3 parties. There was the Commission as the expert in the disability employment rights and practice. We had large employing organisations, and we had an intermediary, which was an employment support provider and talent pipeline. In one set of pilots in the Illawarra region, the intermediary was a disability employment service, but they added additional features to their service delivery. And in the other pilot in Western Australia, the intermediary was an Australian Disability Enterprise, or ADE, working in the same industry sector as the pilot employer, and therefore having a ready talent pool of people with disability who already had experience in that retail environment. So drawing these 3 elements together created an enabling environment for employment. Unlike other employment project designs, the pilots brought together work across all levels of the employing organisation. The Commission worked with the CEO and senior executive, such as diversity or disability inclusion leads at that top level, through their involvement in the employer network. And through this, there was also high-level authorisation and oversight of the way the pilots were running inside the organisation. The Commission also worked at the level of state and regional managers in the employing organisation, as well as at the level of store managers and key staff. Both the Commission and the intermediary were involved in training with the employing organisation, focused on grounded understandings of job customisation, adjustments and support, as Simon has just explained. The intermediary worked closely with each applicant for the jobs and supported revised recruitment processes and supported employees in their onboarding processes. They also provided ongoing support to the employer and employees, and this was really quite intensive in the form of weekly meetings that were held between all 3 parties across the breadth of the pilots, across the 12 or 13 weeks of each pilot. And this level of what people called shoulder-to-shoulder support is a key element of the pilot, and one that all parties attribute to its success. Now, this kind of direct support of employers is not new, but there are features here that we think are different from the way we've seen it played out in other places. And so we've been trying to capture those features in a set of case studies from each of the pilots that sit alongside the evaluation report. While the evaluation report is available online today, the case studies will follow along shortly, and you'll be able to find those on the IncludeAbility website shortly. So keep an eye on that website for those. Another key element of the pilots is that they act as a kind of model or playbook or prototype for employing organisations. So that is, it wasn't just a one-off kind of activity where employing organisations took part, employed new people and kept them on at the end of the project. But it was a way for them to test out a method of employing people with disability that could be subsequently used again in other sites and other parts of their business. And that this kind of prototyping could be further refined as things proceed. So with that background, I would like to now welcome our other guests, Geoff Trappett, the Disability Inclusion Lead at Woolworths, and Kane Blackman, the CEO at Good Sammy Enterprises, as key partners in the Perth pilot. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Great. Now we have an opportunity to dig more deeply into your views about what happened here. You've both got experience in a range of employment projects. So what's fascinating, I think, for all of us is to try and get into what was valuable about this particular pilot and what perhaps might have made it different from some of the other activities that you might have ongoing now or you might be involved in. So, Geoff, what was valuable for you about this approach?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from Sydney, from the land of the Gadigal people. For me, what was valuable about the pilot really comes down to the partnerships that were involved. The partnerships with Good Sammy's, the partnerships with the Australian Human Rights Commission, the partnerships with Swinburne. all working their piece of the puzzle to ensure that we held people with disability at the centre of the project, and that we furthered the cause of people with disability. I look at Good Sammy's, and we were I don't know, Kane might disagree, but we were what I think is a match made in heaven for two organisations that both had a very similar way of looking at what does meaningful employment mean for people with disability, and we aligned very quickly on that. For us, that's been one of the biggest learnings. Is we've actually taken out of this project that we need to do a piece of work working with all of the disability employment providers that we work with across Woolworths Group to ensure that we do have that same level of alignment that we had with Good Sammy's, because really that was crucial. We both knew what meaningful employment was for people with disability, so we knew the end goal. We knew where we wanted to head to, and from there it was a really easy process for us to work through what those societal barriers that we all know unfortunately exist for people with disability in employment were specifically to Woolworths Group, and work on removing those and using Good Sammy's as that expert, because we are at our heart a supermarket, and as such we're not going to be experts in disability. We relied on Good Sammy's to be that expert in the candidate that they were providing us, and they were certainly experts in those individuals, and that was certainly a huge and valuable aspect to a successful project for us.
Thank you. And you really highlight a couple of things that resonate from the other data that we heard, and one of those is that values alignment between the intermediary and the employing organisation. And many talked about, it works when that works, but other employers had talked about it doesn't work when you don't get that right. And so there had been some, critique in the past. And I think the other thing there was the deep understanding of the intermediary about the people with disability that were entering the workplace there. So they were common elements I can hear across the pilots. Kane, what's your views about what was valuable about the project?
Yeah, thank you, Erin. I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm on the lands of the Whadjuk Noongar Nation over here in Western Australia. For me, there are a number of things. Absolutely the commitment to a person-centred approach, to understanding an individual's employment goals, and especially when they are open employment goals, and the utter commitment of all parties to achieve those goals was very important. And that required some detailed discussions with the individual to understand their aspirations, what supports they required to be successful, and then the partners themselves really having that can-do attitude. It was a very safe space for all of those key partners to come together to have that shared commitment and that appetite to achieve employment outcomes. There was never a time where it was, we can't do that, or that's too tricky, or this has been our previous problem. It had always been, how can we make this work for this wonderful cohort of talented people with disability. I also was very proud of the outcomes that this trial has delivered, because from the Good Sammy's perspective, it focused on young people with intellectual disability, and that cohort within disability we know faces significant disadvantage and unemployment at a greater rate than other people with disability. And it was wonderful to be able to demonstrate that such a large number of people, young people with intellectual disability, are able to achieve open employment in one of the nation's largest employers, and that's I really hope that's something that others can look at and replicate within the state and within the country as well. And it demonstrates that it's possible, those pathways. I think the other thing for me is that the importance of finding the right partner to achieve those employment outcomes. Good Sammy Enterprises is a work integrated social enterprise. We run a range of social enterprises and have that deep experience of disability and of intellectual disability. And it makes it easier to achieve those outcomes when you have a partner like Woolworths that was very much committed to seeing employment, that saw the benefit for their business, saw the benefit for the individual, and saw the benefit for the whole system change that could be generated. So often you're having to convince employers of the merits of hiring people with disability. And when there is an amazing, talented cohort in our community at a time of the lowest unemployment rates in the country's history. So the right partner was a key one for me.
That's really interesting. And again, you've raised a number of things that resonate across the pilots, that sort of shift in thinking around, can we employ people with disability, to how can we do it, and moving into the problem solving mode, the make it happen mode, I think seemed to be something that pilot participants and at all levels talked about quite a lot, and also sort of that focus on what are the conditions for success. What do we have to get right here to make this work across all of the parts of the puzzle, if you like, including inside the employing organisation. So in that context, Geoff, what are you taking away in terms of lessons to do this stuff going forward?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest lesson for Woolworths Group is that we already do a lot of the good work that needs to be done in this space. We already make efforts to understand each individual as we take them on as a team member. We already do good work in understanding what barriers each of our individual team members might experience, and really doing that in a disability space is just taking that deep dive into exactly what we've already been doing with a disability lens attached. So looking at what barriers a person with disability might be coming up against in their workplace, what barriers might we have in the talent acquisition space or the recruitment space. We really took this as an opportunity to look inwards on ourselves and stop and think, have we really been giving this the old college try, as they would say, when it comes to removal of those barriers. And it was important that we had those critical friends of Good Sammy's and the Australian Human Rights Commission really keeping us honest on that, is that as far as you can go? Kane will tell you that when we first started having the conversations around this project, we came up with a number of reasons why this might not work. And funnily enough, once we actually had humans speaking to humans, then it all fell into place. And I think that's another lesson, is make sure that you keep a human feel to these things. Don't try and look at this as an analytical, we need X number of employees or team members. Look at each individual as a human being, and what are we adding to the life of that human being by being able to give them meaningful employment. I mean, I think of the example of one of our team members that wanted to save up enough money to be able to buy his dad a beer. You can't come up with a better story than that for me. Of what the difference that makes to have meaningful employment. And everyone can get behind those kinds of stories, those kinds of meaningful acts that a person with a disability wants to have in their life. So pulling out those meanings of what this job could mean for a person with a disability helps to build a team atmosphere. And I'm probably more proud, if I'm honest, of the more people that we've taken post the pilot on from Good Sammy's than I am of what we did during the pilot. During a pilot, it's all too easy to put a level of hypercare on a pilot and ensure that it works. And we really went above and beyond to try and not put a level of hypercare over this that we knew we couldn't continue with post the pilot. And to see more people being employed post the pilot is really the thing that gives it a tick for me, that we've done well, because we've embedded the processes on how to employ people with disability in business as usual processes for those teams in Perth. And that's really what will put us in good stead to not only do more good work over on that side of the country, but to take the lessons from the project and build that out across the country and across New Zealand. That's what I'm looking forward to doing next. So what I take away from this personally is, as a D&I professional, it's all too easy for me to be in the room and help something be done. It's what can be done when I'm not in the room anymore. That's really where the rubber hits the road on employment. And that's really where I'm most proud, because now we've got team doing this by themselves. And that's really fantastic for me.
Awesome. Kane, what are you taking away from all this?
Yeah, I echo Geoff's point about the team approach here, and ensuring that model is moved forward. And we've had an amazing team with our employment pathways team that have provided that shoulder-to-shoulder support to the individuals and the employer, Woolworths. I think the core thing for me is finding more people like Geoff and more employers like the Woolworths Group. Really, there is a large number of talented people with disability who are searching for employment in this country, and there is also a deep pool of people with intellectual disability, often working in work integrated social enterprises, that are keen for those open employment opportunities. So I'm keen really to find more partners that align with those employment goals of the individual, be it not everyone wants to work in a supermarket, but in all industries, finding those people and then helping to provide those pathways to the individuals into those workplace settings, and in a really inclusive way, not in a way which someone can succeed for 2 or 3 months, but ongoing as a business as usual opportunity. So our organisation is certainly putting significant focus on those open employment transition pathway resources. We're trying to find like-minded thinkers in that space who are deeply committed to the individual's employment goal, whether that be within or outside the organisation. The focus on educating employers about job carving and job customisation, and what they'll often find is that they already have examples of that occurring in their own workplaces, and often sometimes aren't able to draw the link of that might be a tool in their belt they can use to increase the number of more employment opportunities for people with disability. So we're very much focused in that preparation for that, and on the search for more employment partners. And the other thing for me that I take away is the importance of employment for people with disability in public-facing customer service roles to raise the awareness of this wonderful talent pool, and to better build community attitudes towards people with disability in the workplace. And it's absolutely delightful to see our now former staff working in grocery stores, in the bakery areas, and it's certainly then generated enough buzz for other people who have seen that success and then said, oh, actually, I perhaps hadn't thought about that pathway before for myself, and now I can see my former colleagues there, and I'll put my hand up for that as well, and equally other people see that in the community and then start to change their perceptions of what's possible. So for us, it's really doubling down and continuing forward to achieve that, because there's 1 million Australians with disability of working age in this country, not in employment, 1 million people. And at this period of low unemployment, if not now, then when for me?
Yeah, great. And I can see there's a lot of questions in the chat as well. They're firing off this conversation. So I want to invite now our other panellists into the chat area. And hand over to Dr. Jenny Crosby at the Centre for Social Impact to take us through the chat and wrangle the cats of those of us on the panel. And welcome also Rhiannon Walker from the Australian Human Rights Commission onto the panel today, and Simon back into the room. Thanks, Jenny.
Thanks a lot, Erin, and thank you for that great discussion, Kane, Geoff and Erin. We've got a lot of questions coming in, which is great, and we won't be able to get to all of them today, but what we'll be doing is keeping those questions, and we'll produce some answers, and we'll get those to attendees today. So if your question doesn't get asked today, we'll still be able to give you a response. So one of the questions I wanted to ask the panel was around the language we use when talking about employment for people with disability. So we use terms like reasonable adjustment, disclose, and inherent requirements of the job. And these are subjective words. And in the case of disclose, it sounds like somebody's trying to hide something. Do you think it's time to update the language we're using? Who'd like to start? Geoff? I'm
happy to jump in. I certainly think there's value in aligning with what you mean when you use language. I'll use the example of meaningful employment. Having a good understanding of what you mean when you use that term, I think to me is crucial to make sure that you're aligned with the other people in your space, so that when you look to a success metric, you know you're heading in the same direction. So for me, I don't tend to focus on the specific term and it being right or wrong. I tend to focus more on having a shared understanding of each term as being the crucial element.
Betty, if I might just add, there is a section in the evaluation report that goes to policy implications, and part of that does pick up on some of this, and also, drills into the Disability Royal Commission's recommendations in this space, and they are suggesting some changes around that reasonable adjustment language and the concept of adjustment just being adjustment. We make adjustments and we provide supports in a much more expected, business as usual way, rather than having to go through some, proof of reasonableness test in relation to that. So there's some interesting policy changes coming as a discussion in the evaluation report.
Okay, thank you. I'll move on to the next question. So in the evaluation section, Erin, you talked about the talent pipeline and large organisations being unable to locate where there was talent pools of people with disabilities. So has anybody got any suggestions about how we can better connect particularly specialised disability employment services with these large organisations? What do we need to do? What needs to change?
Kane might be a good one for this.
Yeah, I was going to say, Kane, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. There's lots of ways to connect. I don't think that the challenge is actually the connection. I think sometimes it's who's at the end of one of those connections, which is then probably having a proactive employer with appetite to find and employ people with disability. It's not enough just to put a CCAT out and encourage people sometimes with disability to apply and use the traditional channel in that way. There needs to be active work done by employers to reach out to work integrated social enterprises and build that relationship with them, and there's 140 of them across Australia, to reach out to disability employment service providers and build that relationship, to reach out to the amazing disability advocacy groups we have throughout the states and territories and nationally, and understand great pipelines for them, and also to have a plan that they can communicate that really shows their appetite and desire to increase the inclusiveness of their workplaces. So for me, it comes really more down to the willingness to really do that, and also thinking internally, their willingness then to actually consider customisation and job carving for some people who might not want to work the 5 days a week. They might only want 2 days a week, or there might be something part of the role that they need additional support with. So again, it's the willingness and attitude to be able to be flexible and actually meet someone where they are, and for me that's the key.
Okay, thanks, Kane. Did anybody else have any comments about how we better connect the talent pipelines with the large organisations?
I think it's certainly something we need to think some more about. I think, Geoff, as you were talking about the sort of match made in heaven with Kane, I imagine you want another 100 of those around Australia, and there's a bit of workload in finding that, given that you want that values alignment. You really need to build those people-to-people relationships, given that, as you say, it's people at the end of the phone, really, speaking to each other. So there is a bit of work in that space to be done. I think one of the things that happened in this project was surfacing some different talent pipelines as well. And Kane, you just mentioned some others as well.
Great. And I think, Simon, you might have had something you wanted to add there.
Yeah, I was doing my usual trick of mute on once again. I think it's both sides can be a lot more creative. And on talking about on the talent side, there's got to be a lot more opportunities for people with disability, and there's that diversity within disability also needs to be recognised. That there are very different forms of accommodation for very different types of people with disability, and being able to communicate that in a way that doesn't scare off employers, I think, is really important, because what they're looking for is a simple answer to what is a complex question, and so being able to demystify that. But I think on the disability side of things, and I reflect back from the time I was 15 to 19 when I had my accident, I'd done probably 20 casual jobs, work experience, all sorts of opportunities, and many people with disability don't get a chance to do that and go, oh my God, I'd never want to do that again. For a lot of people, it's been one shot. So being able to give people a variety of experiences also builds up their job fitness in that sense as well. So I think there's a lot more on the supply side, from schools, stepping stone programs to make people confident, but also on that employer side, as was said, first piece of research I did, not on employment, somewhere else, and it can-do attitude by the employer or the business is gold. You can make adjustments very easily when the person's got an open mind. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, and we definitely saw that in the pilots, no question. Now we're very short of time, so I'm just going to ask Rhiannon one question, which is around IncludeAbility 2.0. We're getting a lot of questions about what that's going to look like, and I know it's early days for you, but have you got any sort of sense of what or how people on the webinar today particularly might be able to engage with IncludeAbility 2.0 when it starts?
Oh, thank you, Jenny. Hello, everybody. It's Rhiannon Walker here from the IncludeAbility project, coming from Darug and Gundungurra country. I have seen all of the questions on the chat about IncludeAbility 2.0, and particularly co-design and the role of ambassadors, employee network members moving forward. And I would love to talk to this for another hour or so, because I'm really excited about the next phase of IncludeAbility. But how we plan to proceed with the next phase of IncludeAbility is once, so we are awaiting the announcement of a new Disability Discrimination Commissioner. And once they're commenced in the role, we're going to kick off the new year with a series of co-design workshops where we're going to bring together key stakeholders from the project as it stands, and then also the sector more broadly, to consider what really worked in terms of the project, what we could do better, and some opportunities for the project moving forward in light of the Disability Royal Commission findings and other key policy reform areas. So these are planned. We're hoping, we're in very early stages of planning these, but we're thinking around March, April, and we're really looking forward to authentically bringing the sector together with us to not only co-design, but implement and evaluate the project, and so that we can make sure that we're really authentically listening to the voices of lived experience when we design the next phase of includeability. So naturally, the terms of reference of the ambassadors and employee network members will expire, but all will be invited to participate in the next iteration, and we'll be opening invitations up to wider networks as well. So stay tuned. We will have more information regarding this in the next month or so.
Great, thanks, Ree. And in terms of staying tuned, people can subscribe to the AHRC. What are they called, Ree? The newsletter.
Yep. And
yeah,
social media and website.
Yeah, so if you tick the disability box as one of your areas of interest, you'll receive information about includeability. And yeah, LinkedIn and X, formerly Twitter, the Includeability Project are on there as well. So well, I'm sorry that we didn't get to more questions. We've got 36 questions sitting there now. So as I said, we will aim to address some of those questions and get those responses back to you. That's all for now. I'd like to just hand over back to Simon Darcy for to conclude the webinar. Thanks, everyone.
So thank you to everyone that attended the webinar. There were between 250 and 300 plus. We know that there were over 600 plus registered, and I do that a lot of the time. I register so I get access to the video afterwards if it's during a busy time. And so the link to a video recording will be shared next week, as well as answers to any questions that we didn't get to today. I'd also say go on and have a look at the FAQs on the website that are already there. The Includeability website has that further information about employment for people with disability, for employers and people with disability themselves. The evaluation report is on the Swinburne Centre for Social Impact report. As Rhiannon had said, stay tuned for Includeability 2.0. In signing off, the learnings there about matching values of organisations, I think, is a very important one. Businesses, don't worry. You've got the business knowledge, and the intermediaries will bring the disability knowledge. I'd also like to say risk management's important, but don't overthink it. A lot of organisations really get stuck in the mud of risk management. There's always going to be barriers, but as I said, can-do attitude is more important. And just picking up on something Geoff said, in the academic world, we always complicate things, but post-pilot embeddedness is a real outcome for me. So there's scaffolding, but it's not over scaffolding of it, because what we're seeing here is good retention, where we know that retention after 6 months in previous disability employment agency programs was down to as little as 13%. So let's go forward. Pilots are a good kickoff, and I'm really hyped to see what comes next with Includeability 2.0. Thank you all very much.